into each side of the gate, which was exactly as Dyson had described it to us.
This is how the gate looked in March, and here again is the artist's impression drawn from Dyson's memory.
In the winter you could see the birch trees were evident there, as were the western hemlock. So all in all, it had just about everything at this location. And certainly as you look across the other side of the road, Dyson said to us, there are no trees on the other side of the road opposite the gate, and 2 fields away you'll see some farm buildings and a large grey metal building. So you, putting all those things together, we knew this was the place that Dyson had been describing.
Dyson said he'd driven through the gate and then hidden Joanne's body. But with no sign of her, Ray and Phil ventured deeper into the woods. Patricia Wiltshire's description of western hemlock and birch trees was being borne out, but they'd soon walked about 300 yards with no sighting. Then Ray came across a large dip.
There was a large tree on the ground, lots of branches underneath, smaller branches underneath those branches, and it was a shape which was at odds with everything else around here really. It was clearly man-made, clearly designed to cover something up. As I bent down to look at it, the first thing I saw was the shape of a bin bag, and looking at it more closely you could see the bin bags had been wrapped with clear tape, and I realised there and then that in reality the search was over and we'd found Joanne. This was the end of 39 days of searching, and to find her in a quiet, isolated spot like this was quite an emotional feeling, to be quite honest. It's a very still place, very quiet place. You've got time to think your thoughts. And I suppose the overriding feeling I had was one of being quite sad, really. Extremely sad that Joanne had met her end in a place like this.
It seems remarkable that the man leading the search for Joanne should be the one to find her, and there's no doubt that Patricia Wiltshire's forensic analysis was vital. Look again at the Botanical Society's maps. The purple squares mark the areas where the plants could be found, and we've marked where Joanne's body lay. But what about the help Paul Dyson gave? Did his accurate description of the gate mean he'd been telling the truth all along? On this aerial photo, we've marked where he said Joanne's body was, close to the entrance. But in fact, this is where she was found, right in the middle of the wood.
Dyson had said to us that he'd left her in a place where she would be easily found. He claimed she was lightly covered with a few pine needles, but that wasn't the case. She was covered with a tree, some fairly large branches, and as you can see, I mean, she's hidden and concealed in a very, very isolated place indeed. And I feel it's unlikely that he ever intended for Joanne to be found.
Detective Superintendent Ray Higgins ending that film by our reporter Joe Makel. And so Joanne was at last returned to her family for their final goodbyes. Her funeral in Hull saw hundreds of people turn out to remember this much-loved 22-year-old. Well, let's return now to Joe, who's at the home that Joanne shared with her murderer, Paul Dyson. Joe, just remind us of what's happened today, will you?
Peter, it's been an extraordinary day. In a very short but significant hearing, Paul Dyson finally admitted that he was guilty of Joanne's murder. As we've said, 9 months ago, it was he who reported Joanne missing to the police. It was he who made that 999 call, but he lied to the police, he lied to Joanne's parents, and he lied to the public in the interview that he gave to Look North. Finally, though, today, he decided to admit his guilt and plead guilty to her murder.
The events at court mean there hasn't been a full trial. I mean, that still leaves lots of unanswered questions in this case, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and the biggest question of all is why. We have a certain account of what happened, and that's that there was a domestic argument, something to do with the washing, how little Paul Dyson did around the house, but we really only have his version of events of what happened on that day.
Well, we've only got Dyson's word for that, of course, but he would say it was over domestic chores, such as doing the washing machine, the fact he was useless around the house, that kind of thing.
Well, that was Detective Superintendent Ray Higgins, who has led this investigation. And as he said, we only have Dyson's word for what happened. We'll never really know, and Joanne's family will never really know what went through his mind on the day that he'd murdered his fiancée.
Joe, thank you very much indeed. Now, finally, this Monday evening, let's get the weather forecast with Paul Hudson.
Well, thanks very much, Peter. It looks as though we've got some strong winds and eventually quite a bit of rain to come in. You've just seen